Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. I'm Vanessa Moore from Democrats Abroad, Lion City. And along with our co-hosts from Democrats Abroad, Korea and Japan, we'd like to welcome you to today's panel discussion, the 2022 midterms, what to watch from the politics to voting rights. Obviously, these issues are top of mind for all of us right now. We all want to know what to watch for in 2022, what the impact will be of all the new restrictive voting laws around the US, and hear about the state of play in Washington. I've attended many panels with this all-star group, and I'm really excited that we've got them here today to share their insights with us. And with that, I will introduce them. Our moderator, Steve Okun, is a senior advisor based in Singapore for geostrategic consultancy McClarty Associates. He served in the Clinton administration as Deputy General Counsel at the US Department of Transportation and regularly provides analysis and commentary on US politics, government, and trade for global media, as well as writing commentary for the Straits Times. And for our panelists, I'm pleased to introduce Thurgood Marshall Jr., who served as White House Cabinet Secretary in the Clinton administration. He's been named one of Washington's top campaign and election lawyers by Washingtonian Magazine and chaired the Advisory Commission of the American Bar Association Standing Committee on Election Law. A veteran of multiple US presidential campaigns, he now practices law in Washington, D.C. And I am also delighted to introduce Peter Goelz. Peter is a longstanding Democratic political operative and a veteran of numerous presidential campaigns. In the Clinton administration, he served as the managing director of the National Transportation Safety Board. Now he serves as a senior vice president at O'Neill and Associates, where he offers decades of experience in national crisis communications and federal relations, appearing frequently on CNN, CBS Evening News, Fox News, MSNBC, and others. And without further ado, I will now hand things over to our moderator, Steve Okun.
Well, it is really an honor for me, Thurgood, and Peter to be at the first event that Vanessa has hosted as chair of Democrats Abroad in the Lion City. So, Vanessa, we're just so happy you asked us to be your kickoff guests. We really appreciate it. And, I want to just kind of set the stage for, where we are politically in the United States right now, and we can all work off of that template. I think you have to understand that the United States is a restless country. I think probably we're all Democrats on this call, and look, it may not be that they voted for Democrats, it may just be that they voted for change, and that's happening all the time. 7 of the last 8 elections, the public voted for change. It was Barack Obama's reelection was the only one that wasn't. And so we are in an extraordinarily turbulent time, maybe the most turbulent time in the history of the United States politically. And this is driving a lot of the politics that's going on, because how long will the Democrats have to stay in power if all of this change happens all the time? And we used to talk in 2016, about, well, the Democrats really should have won 2016. Hillary won, the popular vote by about 3 million votes. And she only lost the Electoral College by about 78,000 votes spread out across 3 states. You switch those votes and Hillary would have won. And so as Democrats are saying, well, we really should have won in 2016 and expected to win in 2020. But you know what? Trump lost by an even narrower margin than Hillary did. You take 43,692 votes spread across 3 states, Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin, and Trump wins, even though Biden won by 7 million plus votes, nearly 8 million, even though Biden flipped the Electoral College. It was still an extraordinarily close race. And the Republicans truly believe that they're going to win, that they're going to win in 2022, and that they're going to win again in 2024. And that's driving a lot of the politics in Washington as well. So what do the Democrats have to work with now? It's the narrowest control in 20 years. The Senate evenly split only because the tie-breaking vote goes to the Vice President of the United States. Do the Democrats control the Senate? The House right now, it's actually 220 to 211 with 4 seats vacant. And so that margin of 9 means all you have to do is flip 5. The Republicans pick up 5 seats in the midterms. They are going to get the House. Pick up 1 seat, they're going to get the Senate. And the president's party usually loses in the first midterm. In fact, if you go to the House, only once since John Kennedy in that first midterm did the party in control of the White House pick up seats in the House. And that was George W. Bush, because it was coming right off of 9/11. And the Republicans, having won those 11 seats in 2020, they just need 5 more. And so the House is really, really in play. The Senate on a razor's edge, and Democrats need to be thinking about both of those things as they're trying to figure out what to pass in this Congress. And we've got coming changes in congressional representation. We could talk about this more at length, but just to know that with the reapportionment that comes with the census and the redistricting that comes with that as well, it is likely that we have Republicans today would have the majority in the House. So if the races only go as expected with the new seats, the Republicans should win. So the Democrats are really starting at a deficit, not in a majority going into the midterms. The Senate, again, it's basically 50-50 still. The Democrats have 4 seats that are leaning only towards Democrats. They're not safe. Mark Kelly, the new senator from Arizona, is leaning towards him. Raphael Warnock in Georgia, the new senator there, the seats leaning towards him. The Republicans only have 2 seats leaning towards them. So the Senate map, everybody talks about how such a good map for the Democrats. It really, again, is going to be extraordinarily close. And every vote counts in the House and the Senate. And so with that, I want to introduce our speakers. This is kind of to show who we are. This is a picture of me back in '97 with President Clinton. And that's a picture, I think that was 1998. Yeah, that's me and Peter Goelz when I was at DOT and Peter was at the NTSB. Peter has an even longer history in Democratic politics than I do. There he is with Jimmy Carter. And if we want to go even further back, yes, that's Thurgood with the Speaker of the House, Carl Albert. And with that, Thurgood, why don't we turn it over to you? And you can talk about where we are with voting rights.
That was absolutely not fair. But, thank you for having me, Vanessa and Steve. And it's always good to be on with Peter. Although, as long as we're discussing that, I was impressed with Peter's mustache. So the voting rights issues, astonishingly, have been on the front burner now for the last year in earnest. Although both parties have been flirting with these issues for a while now, going back 5 to 10 years, and many of the issues are being basically relitigated. This is a history that goes back for a century, frankly. The first half of the 20th century, we suffered through, at least in this context, the Jim Crow laws were particularly abusive when it came to voting rights and trying to restrict the opportunities for people of color. But actually, in all honesty, the limitations on voting rights that predominated that era affected anyone who was without property, or frankly, the poorest segments of the American population. And it was a sort of a creative mix of restrictions, everything from the most basic, which was violence and threats directed toward anyone who might go to vote who was perceived to be not part of the established leadership class in the United States, and then more creative ideas like literacy tests and other more extreme tests. The late John Lewis used to describe some of the questions, including one that he was very fond of repeating, which was the question that a poll taker would ask a prospective voter, which was to hold up a bar of soap and ask how many bubbles were in the bar of soap. And questions like that. There were more sophisticated questions, like proving that one owned property. There were voter list purges regularly, but and those are occurring as we saw as recently as last year. So it's sort of a playbook that keeps getting pulled back up into usage. in modern day. There were also taxes, poll taxes, different forms of poll taxes are trying to make their way back into the process with modern efforts. And what we saw at the beginning of this year in the wake of the November election was initially nearly 250 pieces of legislation, largely aimed at restricting opportunities to vote around the country. There were I think at last count, Steve might be able to correct me on this, the Brennan Center is reporting that there are roughly 400 such bills, and those are now pending or have been passed in, they're pending in some 43 states. They've passed in over a dozen states at this point. Most recently, the Texas legislature, half of the Texas legislature passed what is the most restrictive one to date. That bill is now pending. Steve can update us, but that's the bill where the second chamber in Texas walked out on Sunday night. But that's the limit of the Democrats' ability to push back. They're at some point probably going to have to come in and face the music on that, because they do not have the numbers. But that bill includes a number of extreme measures. Again, following on the November results, it includes a list of measures, including limiting vote by mail, prohibiting drive-up voting, which was one of the COVID solutions that was particularly useful in the Houston area for voters of color, Blacks and Latinx voters. There are any number of additional restrictions all contained in that one bill. So these are sort of a throwback to past efforts, not only modeled on some of these Jim Crow proposals, but modifying them and updating them for the modern challenges we see with voting. And of course, this brings us all back to what happened in November. Steve's right. There was a large differential on the national vote, but it was a very tight race. And that's consistent with what the polls were suggesting would occur. And more importantly, there's no evidence of any kind of widespread voter fraud problems that could have occurred. The system is old and a bit antiquated, but in many respects, that is part of the reason we have some confidence in it, that it is not a universally controlled system with any one set of computers, et cetera. The system is not state of the art, but it is reliable and it is fair. And I'm obviously partisan and biased on this issue, but the last thing I'll mention on this is that on the other side of these efforts in the legislature, state legislatures across the country, there is legislation pending in the US Congress, which has been drafted by Democrats in search of Republican support at the moment. It's passed the House, H.R. 1, which is designed to protect opportunities for citizens to vote freely without these kinds of impediments. So you've got this back and forth going on now, and a lot of effort is being expended by both sides to either promote their proposals or oppose the other side's proposals, when of course we have many more important things that we should be spending time on. So Steve, I went on overtime there. I'm sorry, but I'm happy to expand if there are individual questions.
I'm going to bring in Peter and ask Peter, so what does this mean politically? Do you think that when you couple the loss of seats in states like New York and California and the redistricting that's controlled predominantly by Republican-controlled, state legislatures, and these restrictions that are blatantly targeted at Democratic voters, targeted at Black voters, targeted at inner city voters, what does this mean for the Democrats' chances in 2022?
Well, as Thurgood indicated. And first, thank you for having me here. And I'm really excited to see so many great people focusing on 2022, because one thing Democrats have not been very good at is sustained political action in areas that aren't particularly sexy. We tend to get attracted to the bright, shiny thing, which is part of the reason why we're in the hole that we're in. We don't focus on redistricting. We don't focus on voter rights long term. We have lost some very major battles over the past decade because we simply are reluctant to engage. I think our perilous majority is in great jeopardy. In fact, I think we could, there's a great chance we could lose our majority in the Senate prior to 2022. I recall Senator Jim Jeffords from Vermont, who was a moderate Republican who flipped the Senate himself about I think 15 or 20 years ago to give Democrats control when he became an independent. Our friend from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, could easily do the same thing. He could take a walk on the Democrats, become an independent, caucus with the Republicans, and Mitch McConnell would be majority leader in advance of 2022, which is why people treat Manchin with kid gloves, and there certainly would be no retaliation in the home state were Manchin to do that. But I think we face some very real peril in 2022, in part because while we don't know precisely what the impact of the voter restrictions, and Goody mentioned the Brennan Center, which I would encourage if you're interested in this topic, and you should be. That is a great website to go to. It does yeoman service, and it really is a great site. It will do a number of things. One is, having done get out the vote in presidential elections, for 5 or 6 of them in a row, I can tell you the intimidation tactics start, in terms of limiting early vote, but the real intimidation takes place at the ballot. In Shelby County, Tennessee, which at one point, it's hard to believe, Tennessee used to be a swing state. The trick was always in the balloting places, they would have state and local cops standing, in full uniform inside the ballot place. And when people of color came up to vote, they would pick, 1 out of 3, 1 out of 2. They'd look at the ID, they'd scan the rolls, and they'd say, we're going to have to check on this. And it was inevitably a male. He said, would please stand over there by the officers while we check your name further. Now, they weren't going to check anything. It was simply an intimidation tactic in which, you're sitting there, you're saying, oh, Christ, do I have a ticket that I haven't paid? Is there some other problem? What the hell is this? And inevitably, the voter would disappear before they were called back to vote. And it's these kinds of intimidation practices that were standard during the Jim Crow period and beyond, that we really have to fight. But I think, Steve, in terms of the House, I think we are in serious difficulty there. We are up by 5. A bad Earl Blumenauer, one of my favorite congressmen, rides a bike to work. He's in jeopardy every day in Washington traffic. We could lose him in a minute. You look at the senator at the Senate, our good friend Pat Leahy has got to be 200 years old. And, we have some real challenges coming. And I'm not sure Democrats are ready to engage in the level that they need to. We have believed for 6 years since Trump appeared on the scene full blown, that somebody else should take him on. We loved Bob Mueller. He was going to be the guy that took him out. Then we have a love affair with Josh Bolton. Maybe he'll take him down. There was even a love affair with Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney is the worst person, and has had a terrible voting record. She is, an activist in voter suppression. Yet we hope that, well, maybe she'll take him out. But we don't want to take him out. And until we figure out, and this has been 6 years, how to deal with Trump directly every day in a combative moment, the strategy of he'll drift away is clearly not correct, and we're going to be in jeopardy. You're on mute.
With that, I got it. With that, I'm going to just set up where we are politically, and then I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Corey to lead us through the Q&A. And so, the question then becomes, okay, well, what is it? What are all the things that the Democrats can do? What is it that they want to do? And will Biden be the next LBJ or the next, FDR? And if you look at what he is proposing, between the American Families Plan, the American Jobs Plan, and the American Rescue Plan, which has passed, I mean, we are into a situation where this is the greatest activist government we would ever see if all three of those things were to occur, on, especially if you want to call on top of the CARES Act of 2020. I mean, as a percent of US GDP, we are in real historic natures of having an activist government. And you've got to keep in mind, and we'll stop here and turn it over for questions. Everybody compares back to the Great Society, and that was Lyndon Johnson in the 89th Congress. I'll give you special victory for anyone who can tell me who's sitting behind him. But the House, right? Remember the House? Yeah, the House. The Democrats had an advantage of 295 to 140. Right, the Democrats had an advantage of 68 to 32 in the Senate. Those are not the numbers that we have today. And so, can the Democrats do what they want to do, similar to what was done in the 89th Congress, similar to what was done in the New Deal Congress, without those majorities, doing everything with when you have the filibuster and you have to go through a budgeting process. All those are really interesting questions to be asking. And so with that setup, I'm going to turn it over to you, Corey, and you can take it from here.
Thank you, Stephen. And just a quick note to all the participants here. We do have this Q&A function here, and we do want to make this interactive. So please do continue putting questions in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. And our first question, I'm actually going to turn over to Sarah Jean, who is co-hosting here with me from Democrats Abroad, Japan. Sarah Jean.
Thank you very much. First, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, early morning, later in the evening. Thank you so much. And I want to thank our presenters for giving us a lot to think about. As all of you were presenting, I was really thinking about, from the person abroad standpoint, what we have in common with people back in the US. We often talk about voting by mail, how that impacts us, but that also impacts PWDs, persons with different abilities, older people, people infirm, people who live in institutions, or even people who are part of the Fight for 15 movement who work hours for which there aren't, how can I say, in a lot of places we don't have good voting hours for people to go in person. What do you think about how we might mobilize a coalition and work together with these different people who are going to be impacted by this, so that we actually build stronger political, electoral, and just people powers? Are any of you optimistic about our potential to do this? Sorry for the long question.
Well, if you're looking for optimism, we have to go to Thurgood.
Look, I think that this basket of issues is vitally important as part of the larger package of challenges that we need to work on. And unfortunately, part of the problem is that like some of the other issues I mentioned that harken back to earlier challenges, the unfortunate situation, particularly with vote by mail and absentee voting as well, but for vote by mail, we have had backsliding for many years, starting with Oregon. We have experiences with vote by mail where small glitches were identified and addressed. And we got to a point before the pandemic where vote by mail was well established in many jurisdictions and reliable, to the point where both parties had ready set plans and could count on a set of procedures. The ability, the predictability of it, the ease of use was something that every side of every issue could count on. Indeed, I do work with the Campaign Legal Center, which is a bipartisan group, and it was founded by former Republican FEC commissioner, federal election commissioner, who was John McCain's campaign counsel, and a stalwart Republican political expert and election law expert. It is, as I say, a bipartisan group. That individual, Trevor Potter, is on record repeatedly pointing out how when he was advising Republican candidates and the RNC, a huge portion of their plan was to use vote by mail. I mean, both parties have relied on it. And so I'm sorry, I've gone on the soapbox on the issue, but unfortunately, we now are facing a situation where there is retrenchment on this. And so I think what we have to do is understand that we've got to almost go back to basics. When I say we, it's party, but it's just voters and grassroots interests generally, to remind the general public that this is a tried and trusted tool. I'm all ears for any suggestions to make it more reliable, expand its availability. But you know, we're in this period where we're actually trying to protect it rather than expand it, and so we've got to at least begin by holding the line.
And
I know
Peter,
you know that, but that's
okay.
I think
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
a straightforward one.
You know, and part of the answer to the question is doing, doing a getting HR1 passed. And to do that, though, you need either 10 Republican votes or you need to get rid of the filibuster. Do you see either of those two things happening? With especially you talked about needing to keep Manchin as a Democrat, or are they going to put pressure on him to get rid of the filibuster?
let me just say one thing on what Thurgood said. You know, look at the state of Utah, which has used vote by mail since 2013, and you can't find a more conservative, more Republican leaning state, and they have used it and it's worked well. And you see, and this identifies that one of the core problems we have is that there is no baseline set of facts in the United States politically that can be agreed on by both parties. So if you can't agree on a baseline set of facts, Utah has used vote by mail for almost a decade. The elections have been honest. Elections have been fair. Both sides have benefited from it. If that can't be accepted as a fact, then we're in trouble. Now, the idea of HR1 being used, the only way it will become law is through jujitsu, using a modified what they call reconciliation process, and the problems with the Democrats on their legislation is they always load it up with stuff. for instance, in your 4 bullet points, right? Does it really make uh, sense that that as part of a voter rights issue, the candidates must disclose their tax return, right? That's just a straight shot at Trump. Now, I agree with it. Probably everybody here on the call agrees with it, but it's an instant talking point for Fox to say it's loaded with partisan amendments that we don't need, and that undercuts the efficacy of the effort. So the answer is it's unlikely to pass, and the Democrats are faced with reconciliation. They can only use it a limited number of times, and reconciliation means that they only need 51 votes to pass a piece of legislation. They put it into a budgetary process. The question is which of those campaign issues, which of those fundamental building blocks of the administration do you use it for? Do you use it for voter rights? Do you use it for immigration? Do you use it for infrastructure? And then, can you hold Manchin? So I think we're in a very delicate stage.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, and I want to draw you all out on that a little bit more, and kind of what do these voter suppression efforts in various states mean for voters living abroad, and will the Republicans go there, especially when you consider that it's not just us, but also the military, the overseas military vote as well. Are they going to go there? Will they attack accessibility for voters living abroad?
Well, let me.
Go ahead, Thurgood. You go first.
Thanks, Steve. Since I can't resist going for the bait, but I fear that you're onto exactly part of their game plan at this point. I think at this point, there's no limit to the level of shameless behavior that we can expect to see. We've already seen so many attempts to dredge up things that were symbolic of particularly ugly eras in our history, and to turn them to political advantage. I don't know why this hasn't been attempted in an earnest way already by some of the folks that are just playing these games. So I think you're right to raise the issue, but I think it's something that we ought to be vigilant about, and particularly for the party to do this, because it's something where they have the apparatus to try to fence off and protect the very voters you're talking about.
And I would just say, in terms of where it could get to be on the radar screen, I mean, you look at Georgia, which was 16,000 votes, and I've heard on any number of occasions that Democrats abroad were more than 16,000 vote margin in the state of Georgia alone. And so you swing that, you start to swing seats with the margins that the Democrats living abroad have over Republicans, and then it becomes more of a target. So I haven't heard that is, a focus area. The focus area is on the churches, right? I mean, it's like, we are not going to allow anyone to vote on a Sunday before 1 o'clock. Why? Because that's when the churches, take the souls to the polls. And so we're going to ban that, right? But there's no reason, as Thurgood said, no reason to believe if they're not going to target Black churches, that they wouldn't target another demographic such as Democrats abroad. So I haven't seen it yet, but no reason to believe it's not possible.
Yeah, so just picking up from that, I'm sorry to say that I'm a hopeless optimist. So somebody has to be. And I think as somebody in Japan, where we have a lot of voters that are in the US military, you know, it is one of our target audiences is to try to engage with them on voter registration and voter education. But what else? I always have this question about what we can do as people living overseas to maybe engage people back home as well on this so that they can understand the importance of absentee voting, mail-in voting. What can we do to really empower people? There's a lot of organizations doing voter registration, of course, like listed in the Q&A, Sierra Club, etc. But what do you think individuals like us can do overseas to move others, not just in our, like in Japan?
Well, I'm going to try and get Peter to be an optimist on this question. And so, Peter, do you see the potential for a backlash with this, that people are going to become more aware, more organized? This could actually hurt the Republicans. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, particularly, I think we have to look, you know, to the Supreme Court rulings that are coming down the pike in the next 3 months. That is going to awaken, I hope, the Democratic grassroots in a way that we haven't seen before. You know, we have at least 3, maybe more rulings that are coming that are going to shake Democratic values to the core. And so I think there is going to be, there is a place where I can see Democrats becoming active. But in terms of Democrats, but I mean, I think we need to speak. You need to speak out in terms of op-eds, in terms of a communications network among your members. I mean, you need to raise the flag of awareness of what's coming. You know, it would not be impossible that there might be a requirement that you you'd have to show your citizenship papers when you drop off your ballot at the local council to make sure that you're a verified voter. You know, and that would slow up the process. And I think, you know, I don't know exactly what the process is now, but I think the key right now is ringing the alarm bell publicly that this is a possibility, that things are coming.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think in one additional opportunity comes up in the form of the unique situation we always have following presidential election, which is the statewide races in Virginia and New Jersey. They're sort of one-offs, but we have 2 governor races that are now in play, and you know, we've got a lot of overseas voters abroad, particularly out of the various military areas on the coast in Virginia. And so there's one immediate opportunity there, but you know, this is my turn to be a bit of a dark cloud. I think one thing we've got to remember in terms of the individual races coming up in the midterms next year, one of the issues that is going to be an undercurrent, I think, is that there's very little getting done on Capitol Hill, and it appears that may end up being the case for the foreseeable future. So what you do see is, unfortunately, and I noticed Bruce Murray has a couple of questions that prompted me to want to raise this. There are key issues and successes that the Biden administration has been able to put together, but the vast majority have not required votes on Capitol Hill. It's been executive action. So then there's this odd situation that's going to have to play out where voters will be facing these questions of, as the midterms come up, do you want to check on those executive actions? Do you want to turn over the reins of committee authority to be able to push back and investigate and probe and frankly distract from those executive actions? Or do you want to try to help this administration push through some legislative successes that mirror what they've been able to do on the executive action front.
Yeah, and shifting to issues more generally here, the Supreme Court. Should the Supreme Court choose to erode abortion rights or even LGBTQ plus rights in the next upcoming months? What kind of impact do you think that would have on the 22 election? And where do you think that would open opportunities for the Democrats?
I'm looking at Peter.
Well,
I know he has strong feelings.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much debate about what's going to happen in Roe v. Wade. The only question is whether it's going to be 6-3 or 5-4, and our chance to deal with that we missed in the last election, particularly with Susan Collins, and we have not held the very few pro-choice Republicans in the Senate feet to the fire, and we've lost that issue. And now, will it be a mobilizing issue in 2022? I hope so. But because I think I saw a map the other day that knocked down about 20 states that were going to move immediately to institute the heartbeat standard, which would essentially eliminate even first-term abortion. So, I mean, I am hopeful that the combination of that ruling, we believe the court will probably move towards universal concealed carry rights, which is always a plus. I think I'm hopeful that will serve as a real shock to the democratic system. That the Republicans, through the Federalist Society, have been focusing on the courts for 30 years, and they've won. That's all there is to it. And if we want to fight back, it's going to take a decade or more to win.
Right, Thurgood, the counter argument is that the court doesn't want to get too far out in front of the country, and the country as a whole supports a woman's right to choose. Could you see could you see John Roberts +1 of the Republicans trying to at least not engage in what would be an eruption of a cultural war if they were to overturn Roe outright, and that states like Texas could go to and Mississippi could go to the heartbeat rule?
I can see that scenario playing out, Steve. I think that, I fear for how the court may then be under siege if it happens. But it's now right in the crosshairs of a whole list of different activists on various sides of different issues. But one of the reasons that I think that you're onto one possible scenario that will play out here, that could play out here, is that Justice Kagan in particular has gone to great lengths in a number of cases to try to call out her Republican appointee colleagues on the issue of reliance on precedent stare decisis in legal terms. And that may have the effect of tempering the degree of change that could flow through these decisions.
Yeah, I think it's, you're looking at Kavanaugh. I don't think you're looking at Gorsuch or at Barrett. I don't think either one of them are in the ideological position to hold it up. Maybe it's Kavanaugh, but I don't think so. I think at best it's going to be 5-4. Roberts, he votes against it. He's going to have to work very hard to get another vote to join him.
Sorry, I was on mute, apologies. Okay, so thinking of the issue of the courts, I was wondering what issues do you think might galvanize Democrats to actually come together to actually have a positive impact for next year's elections? Frankly, just one thing that worries me after watching the New York City mayor's debate, Democratic primary mayor's debate, is the place that crime, the focus on crime. And I was wondering, and how that will, I think, negatively impact the New York mayor's race. Are there other issues that you think might have a positive impact and help galvanize us to positive action rather than push us even further backward?
Yeah. Let me say one quick thing. I watched a portion of that debate as well, and I've been torturing myself watching Fox daytime news over the past couple of weeks. And they have such a dystopian view of the United States. I mean, I counted in 1 2-hour segment that they had 18 different stories, 16 of which were just miserable. That the United States was coming undone. There were thousands of people crossing the border, cities were burning, police were being harassed. I mean, if you're living in rural Pennsylvania, where your only source of news is Fox, you have a view of America that is quite threatening. But I do think there are some good stories out there that we don't promote. And I'll give you one. I read yesterday and called somebody on it that in one city in the United States in 2020, the police never fired a shot from in their enforcement of the laws, and that city was Newark, New Jersey, of all places. That through the hard work of the mayor, the police commissioner, and others, not one Newark policeman pulled his revolver and fired a shot in the whole year. Now that's extraordinary. And that shows that you can do policing in a different way, but it's not a story we're promoting. I mean, I believe that the defund the police movement badly damaged the Democrats in the last election. And this is, but we need to organize and promote stories that have solutions. And that's one of them, I think.
I mean, Sarah Jean, the Democrats can go one of two ways. In the first 100 days, it was pretty easy what Biden and the Congress were going to do, right? It was jabs in the arms and dollars in the pockets. And you look, easier said than done. Great job by the administration and the Congress to make that happen, and then working with the states to get all those vaccines out there. But now you're at a much more difficult choices to make. And the Democrats can really go one of two ways. They can say, look, we really only have 2 years guaranteed. And as Peter mentioned, maybe even less than 2 years of having a majority in the House and the Senate. And we have to get everything done we can. We have to address racial justice. We have to address, the climate crisis. We have to address income inequality. We have to do everything, and we're only going to do that through reconciliation and possibly breaking up the getting rid of the filibuster. So we go all in, we go big, and if we lose, at least we've made changes that will be very hard to undo. The other option the Democrats can have is we don't want to have a 2-year majority. We want to have a 4-year, 6-year, 8-year majority. And the way we're going to do that is to not make radical changes. We cannot push a Green New Deal. We cannot push defund the police. We cannot blow up do a court packing or any of those types of things. let's make marginal but significant in the margins improvements, and then be in a position to win in 2022. The Democrats don't yet know which way they're going to go.
Right.
They may not have an option, but that's the debate, I think, Thurgood, that's playing out in the party. How do you see it shaping up right now?
I think you framed that properly, and I'll just add one small piece, because this question had the effect for me of reminding me the key piece of the issue Corey raised with the abortion case at the court. It is most likely, just because of the way the court tends to operate, it's most likely that we won't see a decision until early spring or late spring next year, which puts that issue squarely, however the court comes out, puts it squarely into the debate for the midterm elections. And that will drive a lot of the issue debate and the voter activities next year.
Yes, and this brings us to a really good within the party, discussions within the party and things like that. And I want to turn to Bruce's question here. What is necessary for Chair Harrison to succeed with his version of the 50-state strategy in the midterms, particularly for us organizers?
Well,
I can give this short one. Okay, go ahead, Peter.
I mean, every year or every 4 years, whenever the chairmanship of the DNC changes, there's always some version of the 50-state strategy, and it's kind of traditional political rhetoric. We're not going to leave anyone behind. But let's be truthful. There's no 50-state strategy. We shouldn't waste our money on states like Alabama, Mississippi. Let's have a targeted state on the state that Steve put up that showed where a switch of 40 some odd thousand votes it changes the election outcome. We are not going to change Idaho. We are not going to change Wyoming. I mean, it's always good rhetoric. I've been underwhelmed. I've been underwhelmed by Harrison, but it's very difficult to be head of the DNC when you have a new president and the action is all at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So I mean, we'll see what his initiatives are. I mean, I think the DNC ought to focus on one or two core issues, and leave it at that. And a 50-state strategy is good for a speech when you're raising money in Alabama, but I wouldn't wait. Sorry to be honest, but go ahead, Thurgood, if you want to defend the 50-state strategy.
No, I'm glad I deferred to you, because I know you would have had more fun at my expense. But I do feel I was going to say that I am waiting to see how this will play out. I think that he was an inspired selection for this position. My hope is that he learned some lessons from his recent Senate race, where he raised an extraordinary amount of money, generated an awful lot of enthusiasm, but lost pretty badly, frankly. So my hope is that at the very least he has learned to not waste a lot of money on pieces. I assume that's part of what happened in that race against Lindsey Graham. And so I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because of his communications gifts. But what I was going to say is, with the margins as close as they are for us as Democrats, this sort of work is, among other things, extremely expensive. And I don't think we currently have the luxury of being able to take those hard earned fundraising dollars and put them in places like Idaho at the moment. We've got to lock in the gains that we have, such as they are, but find a few pickups and places where we can shore up this very close majority. I'd love for us to be able to contest all 50, but I just don't think that's a realistic plan at the moment.
And just in terms of that realistic camp, our fellow Clinton alum is and I should say fellow for Thurgood, now UVA law grad, Sean Maloney, who's the chair now. He's a congressman. He's the chair of the DCCC, which is the campaign arm of the Democrats for the House. And he said 218. That's my number. I need to get a 50% plus one, and that I'm gonna try and figure out what are those seats that we're gonna win, and we're gonna win those seats, and that's where all the resources are going to go. And so you have, those pragmatists who are, running the campaign committees, and then you have the chair who because he gets elected by everybody has to talk about a 50-state strategy. Maybe one day we'll get Texas, and maybe one day we'll get North Carolina, and maybe one day we'll get Georgia will become more like Virginia and solidly blue. That's not going to happen in 2 years or 4 years. That's a long term, and so the party does need to think that way. But the campaign committees, they're focused on just majority 50% plus one.
And Steve, I've got I watch certain races to see that they're my canaries in the coal mine, so to speak. Whether the campaign committees, whether the leadership really have the ability to make the hard choices to maintain the majority in 2018. And I'll give you a race that we ought to watch because I know we all know and love one of the candidates, which is Donna Shalala in Florida. She was defeated the last time out, and she won barely. She ran dreadful campaigns. She didn't campaign hard. She was not a particularly effective member of Congress. She had a lousy constituent services thing. Now she's running again, and the woman who beat her is the young Latino Republican, and she will lose again if she's the candidate. And we need to figure out, we ought to say, Donna, it's time to retire. It's time to sit aside. This is not, this is not, where we play this game in long can. And, because you get your knees skinned, you're not our most effective candidate in this district. And Sean Maloney, who is a good guy, has got some very tough races to weigh. And we'll see how it does.
Yeah, and while we're on the topic of opportunities, and perhaps this will be our last question here, since we're at the top of the hour. Forgive me, I am an Arizona voter. I wonder if y'all could talk a little about Arizona. I think our victory, our Mark Kelly victory, our Biden victory was a little kind of forgotten after Georgia and all of that happened. Was Arizona a fluke? They've been saying, I went to the Clinton rally in 2016, and they've been saying forever that Arizona is going to flip blue, and we finally made it happen. Is Arizona finally in our column? And what does that even mean? What about Sinema? Can we get Sinema back to the middle, I guess, on our side? I wonder if you can comment on Arizona, please.
Well, one of there's an additional silver lining, I think, in Arizona because of the insanity that's going on with I don't even know what you call this review of the ballots, but it is a microcosm of what may be going on with Senator Manchin in dealing with the Republicans in the Senate, which is to say, and in Arizona, the parallel example would be the way in which Cindy McCain and some others have been treated by the Republican Party. There's a point where moderates from both parties look at that behavior, and there really is nowhere to turn. And either they're isolated on a very small island with a shrinking number of people who are isolated in that manner, or they drift to the only sort of rational alternative at that point. So I wonder if this odd behavior, looking for bamboo in ballots, and it has this backlash effect. I also would add that since you mentioned the Kelly race, the other this is again, it's harkening back to the previous question on the 50-state strategy, but there are two races in particular in the Senate next year that are reprises of very important races that just had results, which is the Mark Kelly Senate seat and the Raphael Warnock Senate seat in Georgia. And those are vitally important for Democrats to hold. And I think they lay a foundation for the future of the Democratic Party in both of those states. But those are neither is going to be easy, I believe.
Yeah, I agree. And the whole question, Corey, if you can reach out to Kristen to Cinema, please do. I represent a union, the American Airlines flight attendants who have a base in Phoenix, and we find her very perplexing and very difficult to deal with. But I don't think she's going to go rogue on it. But the Mark Kelly race is obviously a critical win for us in the last election, and has to be again. But I think, well, as my wrap up, I want to point out I'm in Virginia. I've known Terry McAuliffe since 1979. He has his hands full, and the challenger that he's got. The first quarter fundraising came out, and he's raised a considerable amount of money, a big chunk of which is his own. This guy Young, he's going to be a problem, and he's already started the pivot to the center in Northern Virginia, which is where Young King is from. The base that Terry and Northrum have made for bringing Virginia blue really has been based on letting a full enfranchisement of former felons, and that has really been a tremendous boost to Democratic voting, and that's why it's been stopped cold in other states. But Virginia is going to be a very tough race, and we need to focus on that. And I agree with Thurgood. Kelly's in a little better shape than Warnock. I think Warnock is going to be the real battle in 2022 to keep him and his good soul in the Senate.
And I'm going to end on the optimist note. Look, candidates matter, and Joe Biden won Arizona by 10,000 votes. Mark Kelly won by 80,000 votes. So Kelly can outrun, a typical Democrat. Obviously, astronaut, Air Force. He can't. Hard to attack him. From an anti-gun perspective. Because he's got such a commitment and passion there, while respecting, the Second Amendment rights. So Mark's a great candidate, and you got to ask who are the Republicans going to put up? If they put up Kelly Ward, who's very pro-Trump, she's the chair of the Arizona Republican Party. I think Mark wins. I think Mark wins that one easy if it's Kelly Ward, and if they put up somebody more moderate as a Republican, someone like who won the Virginia primary, the gubernatorial primary, running against McAuliffe, that's going to be a tougher race. And so really candidates matter. And I will give the last thing I heard from Sean Maloney in why he's optimistic going into 2022 is that, look, when Trump wasn't on the ballot in 2018, and when the economy was going much stronger in 2018 than it was in 2020. The Republicans lost 40 plus seats in the House. When Trump was on the ballot, they picked up 10 or 11 seats, surprised everybody in 2020. Why is that? And that's because the Trump voters come out and vote for Trump. But the Trump voters they're not Republicans, they're Trumpers. And they don't necessarily come out to vote when you have a Republican running and Trump not at the top of the ticket. Now, Trump's not going to be on the top of the ticket in 2022, but if he starts holding these rallies, if he starts campaigning, and you get the Kelly Wards of the world, and you get maybe Herschel Walker in Georgia running, who's probably not going to be a good candidate, as opposed to somebody, like maybe Loeffler in a rematch. Different world. So without Trump on the ballot, but if he's active and all the Trumpers are the nominees, the Democrats are going to be in much better shape going into 2022. And that's kind of my reason for optimism, that even though historically the Democrats should lose the House, that with the economy rebounding, with Biden, being seen as somebody who can have all Americans' interests at heart, and with bad candidates on the other side, we're going to be in good shape if we do the work that we need to do the organizing we need to do, raise the money that we need to raise. So I'm going to end on that optimistic note.
Great, and thank you all so much for answering our questions. And let me turn this back over to Vanessa to close us out here.
Well, thank you all for coming. And thank you so much to Peter and Thurgood and to Steve. That was amazing, so insightful, and I really hope that you'll come back. And it was not as stressful as I feared it might be. A little bit, but okay. So I really hope you'll come back. Thank you so much for taking the time for us, and we hope to entice you soon. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having us. I really enjoyed it. And, I love Steve, love Thurgood, and we would love to come back, and we wish you well on your organizing efforts. Don't give up.
Thank you. We won't.
Very good closing words.
Thank you. No, thank you very, very much. Appreciate this.
Okay.
Thanks, Vanessa. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, with that, I will close it out. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening or day, wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.